The song of death is sweet and endless. But what is this? Somewhere in the sore, bloated man meat around you. A sensation.
Alright, welcome to Glitch Cube. We're a gaming podcast, and each week we take a deeper look into the art of video games. I'm Christian.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going to be talking about a game called Disco Elysium. It's definitely one that's out there. It's a true RPG in every sense of the word, and I feel like this one has really changed what we have kind of gotten used to as far as RPGs go, and it feels a lot more like you're actually playing at a table with your friends, which is a fantastic vibe and just something different that I really resonated to, from the artwork to the music to everything. It's just one of those games that stands out on every single level.
I agree. It's definitely different. And I think that it's pushing RPGs in a different way, in a good way. Mm-hmm. Originally, Disco Elysium was a game developed and published by, I think you pronounce it Zaum. It's like Zaum in 2019. And this is actually the first game from the company. And it's currently only on PC, but I know that there was supposed to be ports for the Switch and PlayStation 4, soon, actually. I remember hearing it was supposed to be around October, November, something around then, but it should be releasing on consoles soon.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, the game's pretty much going for $40, but when it goes on sale, it goes down to $30, which, I mean, I think even $40 is a great deal for a masterpiece like this.
For all the content you get and how just vast this game is, you can pause this game at any point in time and it's a painting. It's just beautiful. Mm-hmm. So that $40 mark it's perfect. I
agree. It's like you were saying, it's a non-traditional RPG. There's no combat, really. It's more so solved by dialogue choices. Mm. And there is one or two parts of combat, but it plays out through dialogue. So you're not actually making the movements or anything. You're just kind of telling the story of what's happening. Mm-hmm. Another thing really unique about this game is that there are 24 skills to choose from, which go from your typical perception, oh, am I going to make this shot, to this one called Shivers, which allows you to speak to the spirits in your settings. Mm-hmm. And you become kind of like this paranormal cop. There's so many different skill choices with this. It's kind of crazy, and it makes it where the game can never really be the same, because you can't max all your skills for this. It's something you have to pick and choose, and then the game just plays out the way you built your character.
Yeah, because I know me and you, we had completely different playthroughs of this.
Oh, yeah.
From everything, which makes it that much more interesting. It really tailors the experience to the player, which is great.
Mm-hmm. And the game was, like you were saying, originally a tabletop RPG setting created by Robert Kurvertis. He was the designer and also created it.
Nice. So for the story, you mentioned it. We've talked a lot about the gameplay and what kind of makes up the game itself. What about the story? What are we getting into?
I think with the world of Disco Elysium, it's definitely something different than what we're used to in a setting. It's a flat Earth, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
And then instead of oceans, without spoiling too much, there's this thing called the Pale, which, when you think about it, think about land, and you have water around it, kind of like a ring. But then past the ocean, there's just this void of nothing. as if it was like the end of the world and you just kind of fell off of it. Imagine it like that. It's just this dark, vast nothingness that you can't see really if you look down. And the game takes place in a town called Martinez, and it's a small working man's town, which basically run by the workers' union, and there's really no law enforcement, so they just kind of take matters in their own hands, which means there's also a lot of corruption from the worker bosses as well as like the corporate bosses that come in and try to force it. There's a lot of like corporate, I don't want to say terrorism, but like corporate conflict, which really creates an interesting atmosphere because it's such a poor and small town. You wouldn't really think like there's any kind of like rich bougie people here, but there is, and it makes it really interesting because you see the struggle between like the working man and the well-off who do come to the town.
The infamous 1%. It's just it's a good reflection on our current day society, just a little bit more hyper realized in your face.
To see the world building, the game really does like a good job explaining the different continents and countries and cities in the world. And there's, I think they said 7 different islands, and each one is a big city, and they're all known for something. And Martinez is kind of the small town that has a lot of history with the war that happened. But it's not really known for too much other than just being like an industrial little fisher town.
Right.
And that's kind of the setting. It's imagine like a little fisherman's town with a beautiful little main street. And then you have your fisherman shacks and little oceanfront property. It's very simple, to put it in simple terms.
So for this, we talked a lot about the world around us. So to kind of go a little bit more into what you're actually doing, you play as a detective who wakes up from a drunken stupor. Sorry, spoilers, but that's literally the first like 30 seconds of the game. And you have no idea who you are, which I think really just plays into the idea of role-playing even more. And your character wakes up not knowing his name, not knowing where he is, not even knowing where his clothes are. So you have to first find out how to get dressed, which is a good little like tutorial on their menu system on how to equip clothing and what the effects of it actually do. So I do really appreciate how they kind of tied in some tutorial aspects in it. And all the dialogue in the beginning is actually in your head, which is really cool. And you're talking to different aspects of your own brain to just kind of figure out what's going on and piece things together. So you play as this detective as you go around the town, and it turns out there's a murder, and you were actually sent there to figure out what happened. And you just kind of collect clues and figure it out from there through the interactions of the people around you, and not just the people, but the environment and the items too. So it just kind of expands on the story that much more. But I think the strongest aspect of Disco Elysium is the dialogue system. The fact that you have such an infinite amount of possibilities within the dialogue is just what really, like, I have to commend the creators of this, because they went above and beyond with that. Like, there's so many RPGs give you that illusion of infinite possibilities, but this one really feels like it's truly infinite, and it truly reflects real life in every sense of the way. And just the idea of having that inner monologue, because we all do it. We all are talking to ourselves in our head and playing things out. And like, we have our logical side of our brain telling us to do something, but then what we really want to do, or like we just go off of instinct and change things up a little bit. And it's really cool to see how things play out depending on which direction you kind of lean. And you can really make this character you. Like, you can personalize it completely to follow your exact train of thought, which is just nuts.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy because, like, you're a typical detective, right? And you can really, like, the setting just really plays into that. Like, it reminds me a lot of LA Noire in a sense that you're in this town that seems like it's back in time, like older, but it's not. And the way that you can build your character is something that I've never seen in a game. And I love playing customizable RPGs. I love games with huge speech trees and like moral systems, right? This game, it doesn't have like a moral meter like, say, Mass Effect or Dragon Age, where it's like, oh, I'm going too much into the good side, or I'm going too much into like the renegade side. Like, basically you're building your character like yourself, and the actions you choose, I mean, you can be anything. You could be a dick and like be rude to everybody, or you could be submissive where, you know, everyone just kind of walks all over you. And the thing that I liked is that, I mean, your character is an alcoholic, and if you wanted to keep that up, you could. Like, the game is set over the span of 7 days, and you're supposed to find out the murder within the 7 days. So there is kind of a time limit, but for the most part, you can get everything if you just kind of pay attention and don't explore too much, which I kind of did. So the first 2 days was me just goofing around, but
oh yeah, I wasted a lot of time.
It worried me at first because I hate games with time limits, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna ruin it because it's the perfect game to get lost into. But when you spend a whole day exploring, you end up like moving the story along slowly. You just don't realize it because everything is so connected. Like, one part of town that you deal with will already like open a dialogue tree for a different area, and it's like, if you didn't do that before, then certain choices wouldn't be there for you. And there were times where I was actually really excited that my exploration paid off. Like, it felt like actually digging around did something, and that's something you don't see in games. Like, a lot of times, like, your choices don't matter, or exploration doesn't really pay off aside from like getting a cool item that might make something easier. Like, no, this, you're getting something that's going to help you with your dialogue. And going back to how your character's an alcoholic, you could keep him drinking every day, and yeah, his persuasion skills are better, and because he goes through withdrawals and stuff, your character is better physically because he's not going through any pains or anything.
Right.
But you can also not drink and have him get a clear head, which is interesting because your dialogue does change just from that. And I mean, like, towards the last day, I had my character doing like speed and all that kind of stuff to like pass dialogue checks. And it's funny because like you have these like conversations in your head, and it's like, oh man, like, this has got me feeling good. I think I'm going to do that. And I'm like, oh my God, like the amount of work, not just talking with other characters, but that inner monologue is just, it's insane.
Yeah.
And the voice acting is fantastic in this game too. Like, it's just, it fits the setting so good.
Oh, yeah.
And that watercolor art is just, it, my God, like, I don't get really excited about a lot of games too much anymore because it's like a lot of them just aren't as mind-blowing as, I mean, they used to be. But this game is just, it's so good. And the customization, like, I'll go over some of the skills and stuff in a minute, but like you were saying, you can have totally different characters and experience a almost different story. I mean, you're always going to try to solve a murder, but a lot of these like character developments that you do with people around the town, you can have totally different outcomes. And I mean, I don't know what your build was, but mine was more kind of supernatural. To give a quick little glance, there was 3 main skills that I had a lot of points into. One was High Shivers, which is the one where you feel and speak to spirits around you, and they help you with actually, like, say you're in an abandoned building and the ghost of the building actually speak to you and kind of help you out. And then Inland Empire was another one, which I like it because it plays on like David Lynch kind of like ideas where you speak to inanimate objects. And in the beginning of the game, you get a tie, and that's kind of like your first experience with the skill. This tie speaks to you. So it's almost like an inner monologue with this tie. And if you have a high enough skill level of it, you can kind of start speaking to any like inanimate object around the area, and it's kind of cool. It's really weird, but really cool, and I actually really like the idea of like being a paranormal cop.
Yeah, that's a trip. I went a little bit more like logical cop, so I dumped a lot of stuff into like the intellectual stats and things like that.
Gotcha.
Because I don't know, for at least my first playthrough, I wanted it to be a little bit more real, and I kind of based all my choices on what I personally feel like I would hopefully do, but obviously in the moment you have no idea what would actually, what would happen. So it was a little bit different because a lot of those times, like I remember you talking about the whole shiver idea before I started playing, and I love that concept so much because I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I do that every once in a while. Like whenever you put on a piece of clothing, you can kind of feel the confidence of that clothing. You feel like a different persona going over you. And this is just a different way of like showing that, where it's like, oh yeah, this shirt, I feel good in it. And like maybe the shirt has like a cocky attitude, right? Like it's kind of playing on that idea of it's manipulating your own personal traits, right? And I don't know, I went very, very logical because I just wanted to kind of figure out this murder and see what would happen if I went that route instead. But there was one thing that I kept forgetting to take off was those garden gloves. Like, so like every time I would do it, like every once in a while, those garden gloves would like pop up in a conversation, which I love the fact that depending on what you're wearing, that even changes the conversations that you're having with people in this game. And this game is purely, like we mentioned, it's just conversations. And even like the battles and all your checks are through conversations completely. And to really just play up the idea of it being a tabletop, you actually see the dice rolls in these checks. And it just kind of, it reminds you that yes, you are playing a game, but there's always that chance of you saying the wrong thing. And it just kind of adds to that randomization, which is really great. But yeah, I don't know. It's one of those games that just kind of really changed what I thought about an RPG for sure. And I feel like every choice that the designers made for this just really lean heavily into that overall theme, and nothing is out of place here. Like from the UI is fantastic because it is like, while the voice acting is amazing, there is a lot of dialogue for you to read, but the way they have it like set up on the screen, it never feels daunting or overwhelming. You actually are like want to read it, and you want to scroll through and take your time figuring out what's going on and playing with these ideas and figuring out what checks you want to actually, like what questions you want to ask to get like different answers and test new things and just play around with the system in general.
Yeah, it's like, I feel, because in the beginning I was doing the whole shivers and stuff, and then I went more of like the intellectual, the side of it. So I was able to do both, but then I realized when you kind of pick in the beginning what you're going to specialize in, other parts of your skill build will kind of not suffer, but it'll reach a limit, and it's much shorter. So my character physically wasn't the strongest, which also plays into your health. So for most of the game, I basically had 2 health, and that doesn't leave too much room for error. And in this game, you can die like randomly,
so easily. I died in the first 3 minutes of the game.
Yeah, it's like even right in the beginning of the game, you can die. And
I turned the lights on too fast, and I had a heart attack. Like, it's just one of those games where it's like everything around you, it just really plays up the idea of like the decisions that you make are important. And it's just way too funny the ways you can die. Like, I even had one where I got a game over screen because he quit being a cop due to embarrassment because of how badly I asked these questions and failed these checks against one of the characters. So, like, it's funny. It's quirky stuff, but it just kind of shows like how what's it, like, fragile the character's mind is, where these little decisions can be like, well, that's it. I've already reached my tipping point. I made an ass of myself. I'm done. Like, I obviously don't know what I'm doing. I quit. So it's just kind of funny to see those little aspects in this game.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of it's like really like small too. Like, I remember there's a point where you can like collect bottles and you get this little trash bag and you can go around town collecting bottles, which then obviously you can sell for a little bit of money. And I mean, money is not super important in the game, but in the beginning you kind of need it for some things. And I forgot to like get the bag out of my hand, and I was wearing like this whole hobo outfit, and someone like commented like, oh, like, you're a hobo cop, like you're blah blah blah, and then like your character actually can run with it, which brings up this other thing called thoughts. And this is a whole nother skill tree. Basically, it's, think of it as the 24 skills where you pick like perception, all that are like your main stats, and then you have thoughts, which are like passive buffs or debuffs to your skills. And there's, I don't know how many there are, but I think there's over 30. Like, I was nowhere near unlocking all of them, but
yeah, there's a lot.
They not only like add or take away from your skills, but they also give you special dialogue trees. Like, my character in the beginning had feminist ideas, so I had easier time talking to women. My character, because of the outfit I was wearing, like the outfit I was wearing gave me this thought where basically my character was a communist. So certain parts of the game, you meet other like communists and they're like, oh, hey, comrade. Like, it was easy to talk to them, which was cool. But then also a lot of people don't like commies. So you have different, if you have a different idea than someone else, it's going to come into the dialogue tree, and if you don't have something to counteract that, like, you will get like chewed out. And I feel like there's really a thought for everything in this game, because there's so many different ones, and it's so cool how that's like a whole new playthrough is just focusing on those. Because the one issue I have with this game, and I mean, this isn't a big issue because you can't create a super character, is that points are shared between skills and thoughts. So say you have 4 points. You can't do 4 points in skills and then 4 points in thoughts. You have to like split them evenly. And the things with thoughts is that you need to spend a skill point to unlock a slot, and then you have to use another point to put the thought into it. And it's just like, really? Like, I want to be able to have all these different thoughts and see more of the game. But I do appreciate that it adds a lot more replay value. Like,
and that's nowadays, just the min-maxer in you too. I mean,
yeah, that too. I mean, I just want to see everything. Yeah. But for me, like, I'm not a person that plays games multiple times anymore.
Right.
I think the last time I did that was like Nier Automata, but that you kind of have to do that.
Right.
Whereas this, it's like, I loved it. I would love to play it again, but I have so many like other games I want to play through that I can't do it. But I loved my character, and I felt like I don't feel this way too often where I feel connected to a character, but because I was able to make this person just like me, well, in a sense, just like me. Okay, I'm not an alcoholic and all that kind of stuff, but I felt like I was actually making these choices. And at first I was playing like, oh, I'm going to be rude. Like, I love being like that jerk when you can be in games. And then I'm like, man, I actually kind of want to play like myself.
Right.
And the game was really enjoyable. Like, it's when I think of a role-playing game, like, this is actual role-playing. Like, you are actually there making the choices.
Yeah, it's definitely a trip, because I fell into that too. Like, when I first approach role-playing games, I think everyone's first instinct is to make something awesome, right? Like, you make something different from who you are because you can be something else. Like, for instance, for a D&D campaign, I'm playing a catfolk freaking cleric, right? Which I'm not a cat. I just love cats. And like, as far as normal builds, like a cleric, I'm not religious at all or anything like that. So it's just kind of funny that you can be something completely out of your norm. And at first with Disco, like, you kind of approach it that way, or at least I did. And I feel like a lot of players would. But then you start leaning back on your own ideals and you end up just playing you, which I think really speaks well to the game, where you can just be yourself, but hyper realized and hyper stylized. It's like a different planet. Like, you don't want to continue to be the badass, amazing person. You kind of want to fail because that's just real life. That's what would happen.
Yeah.
So you want to see these interactions play out, and they set up the failures so well that you want to see it. You want your character to have those actual real life struggles, so that you're not just breezing through everything like you would in another like any other RPG, like any of the Final Fantasies, where it's just you max out your characters and you just blast through enemies, like, not even thinking about it. But here you want that challenge, and you want it to continue to, like, be challenging all the way through. And so for the game itself, like, the style and everything just really plays on each other, like we've mentioned before. And I just really have to, like, the artist in me really has to speak up and say, the artwork in this and the portraits are amazing. They put so much effort into them. And every time I look at the art, I think of one of my favorite artists. His name's Egon Schiele. He's an Austrian artist during the Expressionism period, and he's famous for his portraits. And there's so much, like, life and feeling, and you can feel the internal struggles that these people had or were going through at that time, as whenever Egon was painting them. And I feel like that's directly reflected in the portraits of Disco Elysium. You can see the struggles that they're having, like, especially in your personal character's portrait. Like, he looks like he's in so much pain, but yet he has this plastered on smile he's trying to be something that he's not, and, like, be presentable, but in the eyes, you just, like, he looks sick and he looks like he's hurting and that he doesn't really want to do this, and very, like, I don't actually care right now. And the portrait does change over time depending on your choices that you make too. So it just kind of shows the evolution of your character and just how you can kind of clean up your act and get a little bit less sickly looking. And that's what people are now seeing. So it's kind of cool because we don't see ourselves all the time. So we don't know the faces that we're putting on. So we kind of, like, mirror that with our actions. And it's amazing to see that right there in our face, right? So, like, you see what your character is automatically looking at, like, and what people are reacting to, like, reacting to this sick-looking drunk detective. But then your actions are trying to counter that, and you're constantly trying to either lean in heavy or get away from that image, because it just depends on what kind of playthrough you're trying to do at that time. So it's just really, really interesting. Like, that's for the character portraits themselves. But then when you look at the skill tree portraits, those drawings are very like H.R. Geiger, like, very ethereal, very, like, just kind of, like, the best way I've looked at them is they're all just like a mindfuck. You don't really know what the hell's going on. And it just speaks to the mind itself. It's the personification of these weird mental ideas just put on canvas, and they are amazing. And if anyone doesn't know who H.R. Geiger is, just watch any Alien movie and you've seen his art. He designed that creature, and just look up his paintings because you will get lost in the details. They're so amazing. But yeah, that's my art spiel.
No, I agree with you. That's actually something I've been thinking about, like the thought portraits, and then the skill portraits and the thought ones, because it's like the thought ones are like even more detailed and crazy. Like I love with the skills, the charcoal look, like rough art, and then the thoughts. It's just like you said, it's the amount of work that was put into this game is unreal. And to think that, like, you know, looking at the price point again at $40, like the amount of art and work in this game, it's like
I would buy one of those prints for easily hundreds of dollars, honestly.
Yeah, like I would pay $60 for this game, you know, like a full price game. Like, yeah, the game, I think I beat it in around maybe 16, 18 hours, and that's with a lot of like messing around and stuff like that. And I mean, that's for a modern game, that's not bad.
No.
You know, it's a lot of modern games are at 8 hours or 10 hours. And this one, like, if you can play through it within like 16 hours, I mean, you can always replay it and see something different. So the value's there. And
the 16 to 18 hours is actually like pretty rushed. I mean, I've heard playthroughs upwards of like 40 plus hours of just roaming around, seeing every detail of the world. So
I mean, I know there's a lot I missed out on, because after I beat it, I was like, I'm going to look at like a guide and see like what are some things I missed. And I'm like, oh my God, like,
yeah,
different dialogue choices would have like steered me in a whole different path. And there were like conversations I missed out on that I never would have thought of going back and talking to. Like, it's crazy what's there.
Yeah.
I also think like not just the art is amazing in this game, but the music is really cool in this game too.
Oh yeah.
I feel like it embodies the atmosphere and the art a lot. And there's like a few tracks that kind of stood out to me the most. I think that one of the big ones for me was you wake up in this hotel called the Whirling Rags, right? And there's a song that plays when you go down the stairs. And for me, it's not a track I expected to be in this game, but it's very post-rock-ish, like very subtle, soft guitar that slowly builds up over time. And it's just, to me, like, I loved it. When I first heard that track, I'm like, okay, like, I'm going to dig this game. This game is going to be awesome. And I'm like excited.
Yeah.
And then throughout, it's just tracks are just, they're subtle, but they stand out. And they really play like on the area of town that you are. And I think that's another amazing thing about this game.
Yeah. Every track has a day and night version to it. And like you said, the tracks are very inintrusive. And they don't take you out of the game at all. They just enhance the experience. It's almost like if you're just walking around and you hear music playing on the street, like it just becomes part of this, like the scene around you, and just enhances the overall feel of everything that's going on. So like I still can't believe, like, I'm baffled by the amount of work that went into this, because so many games make it feel like they have a lot of work put into them and a lot of thought, but there's a lot of rinse and repeat assets. And this, you never feel that. You never feel like you're backtracking because you have to go collect the scorpion key to go get some, right? Like it never feels like you're forced to backtrack. Like it feels like you want to, and you experience different things going through, like going down into the main cafeteria area during the day at one point and talking to everybody. And then when you talk to them at night, you have different options and the music's different. So the vibe is changed up a little bit, where like you want to, like, unconsciously you want to make different choices while you're in there, which is very interesting, and some very like hidden ideals in in like the subtleties of the art, the music, and just the scenery around you.
Yeah, it's for me. I'm working on a review for another game right now, and I always like to pick songs that really stand out to me, like in the game. But with that game that I'm doing, like I'll listen to the soundtrack, and it's almost like there's 3 songs, and then the rest of the tracks are basically like a slight remix, right? Like there's an extra drum or a flute or something like that. And I'm like, well, I mean, they sound cool, but when you strip it down, it's the same song, just with added stuff.
Yeah.
But here, like, everything's different. And going back to the Whirling Rags, it's the daytime is different from the nighttime. And I think the daytime track is really cool. And I figured we could put it on right now and just see how it sounds. And then another track that stood out to me was a little bit later on in the game. I don't want to spoil too much, but it's also one of my favorite parts of the game because it's just so ridiculous. A track is called Proto Rave, and I feel like it kind of brings that dark energy that you see like in the setting in some areas in this game. So I definitely think, like, if you have a way of playing this, I mean, it's coming to consoles soon, hopefully. I definitely recommend this game. I think that it can appeal to a lot of people. It is a little slow at first, and I mean, if you are all about action, then this might not be the best game for you. But if you want to experience a work of art that you can play and become immersed in, this is the game for you. It's worth it. I mean, I waited on a sale for it because I was unsure about it at first, but I mean, I recommend it at the price point it's at. I think when it goes on console, it'll probably be that cheap as well. Yeah. But if you have the option to get it, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, this game, in our intro, we always say we take a deeper look at the art of video games, and this is probably one of the most recent games that I've played that really is, like you said, a work of art. Just everything about it really blew my mind, and it just kept me captivated the whole time. And yeah, it is a little slow and there's a lot of reading, but it just, you want to know more. And it's just like a really good detective novel rolling out in front of you. It's a moving graphic novel in that sense, where you get to choose your own adventure as you go through. So I don't know. I love this game, and I recommend it to anybody who's even remotely curious about it. Just pick it up and try it, because it's totally worth it. Watch some playthroughs. Just like immerse yourself in this world, because it is something different, and this studio really needs the credit that it deserves, because they're changing what digital RPGs really can be. We've fallen into this trope of the like hack and slash skill trees, min-maxing characters, when that's not what a real role-playing game is. This is a real role-playing game in every sense of the word.
Definitely. And that also brings up the question of the day for this episode. And that's, what are some innovative ideas that you are hoping to see in the future when it comes to games? Kind of like this, where it's a social RPG where you don't really focus on combat. What are you hoping to see? If games like this can exist, what is something new that you would like to see happen? Or maybe it's something that already exists but could be improved on.
Nice. That's a really good question. I love that. And if you guys like the question, you want to answer it, you can hop on our Discord, join the conversation with us. There are links strewn about, and we'll definitely make sure that's all available for everybody to hop on and just chat with us.
And feel free to leave a comment down under the podcast as well. There's a little comment section, usually from wherever you're listening.
Yep.
And just hit that follow button.
Yeah.
And stay tuned for next week's episode.
Yeah. And first of all, last thing, I really want to say thank you to everybody that's been listening to this so far. We really appreciate it. So if you could just rate and review us, that's definitely going to help us out a lot to reach out more audiences or more people in general. If you can just share it with your friends, let people know, and just spread the word. So yeah, that's going to do it for us for this week. That was our little chat on Disco Elysium. Once again, my name's Christian, and if you want to follow me on Instagram, see what kind of art or what things I got going on, I'm at Kieran, and it's KEURAN. And
I'm Chris, and you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter under SloppyCube. Just like that. On Instagram, I at least post a lot of retro games and stuff. So if you're into looking at like old games, I usually like to post about them with a little bit of like history tied with them. So
awesome. Well, thank you guys once again for listening. We're Glitch Cube, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.